Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome.
Turn my speaker off.
Okay.
Back on.
Well, AI thinks it knows better and doesn't always. That's my conclusion. Anyway, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Township of Georgian Bay for this special Committee of the Whole meeting on Tuesday, February 11th at 2025. And I'd like to call this meeting to order at 1 o'clock. And in the spirit of reconciliation, we wish to acknowledge the enduring relationship between Indigenous peoples and the territories they traditionally occupied. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection they have to this place, the land, the water, the sky, and all that live on, in, and above it. We are grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of Indigenous peoples who have taken care of this place and who continue to care for it. And we want to show our respect. Hundreds of years after the first treaties were signed, they remain relevant today. May they guide our decisions and actions. We commit to learn, to educate, to honor sacred places, and to take action towards real truth and reconciliation. Make which. Council, any declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest? All right, seeing none. Did anybody sign up for open forum? They did not. So now we're on to staff reports, which is actually discussion. But we're going to welcome James Steele, Commissioner of all things dirty and wet and whatnot. I think it's Public Works, Engineering and Public Works at District. Do you want, oh, excuse me, I'm getting all choked up about you being here. Do you want to lead off the discussion, or do you want us to, how would you like to do this?
Thank you, Your Worship. I thought what I could do is answer any questions that members of committee or council have.
All right, thank you very much. The first thing I want to make actually a couple comments, and that is regards to, I know that Councillor Hazelton distributed some numbers to all of us, and I wanted to share a few numbers, and then with that, hopefully we will not spend most of our time talking about numbers, though I think there's some numbers are relevant. One is the question, the dilemma. How many properties do we actually have in this township? And of those properties, how many of them are actually occupied with a residence? And it seems to be a variety of answers. And I'm going to share a few of those answers with you just to show the variety. If you go to Stats Canada, they say we have 5,001, this is 2021 figures, because those are the ones I was able to find online. In 2021, Stats Canada said we have 5,175 residences, or dwellings rather, they call them dwellings, private dwellings, of which 1,660 were occupied by the 3,441 permanent residents of this township. That's one source. If you happen to ask the, where did my note go? If you ask the OPP, they used a different number that I'd written down somewhere here, and now I've lost it, but it was 5,800, I believe. So they had a slightly different number. Oh, sorry, 5,786. So their number is about 600 higher than StatsCan. And they refer to households. So they said there was 5,786 households. Okay. If you go to MPAC, you can get confused because they have all these different categories, and I'm not even going to go down that road right now. But if you go to the district solid waste budget, they say we have a total of 9,019 what they call units. And of those 9,019 units, 1,917 hit, they call it curbside. I think they're pretty full of those curbs, but they get roadside pickup. 1,917 is how they calculate their charges to us. I don't know where to go with all these numbers because they may or may not make sense. So I'll just finish for a moment and then I'll make a couple of comments. I think for sake of argument, we can ballpark that we have roughly 6,000 residents in this township, of which 3,000 or so, roughly half, are water access only. And of the 3,000 that are land accessible, roughly 2/3 of those, or 2,000, get curbside, roadside pickup, and 1,000 do not. Very rough ballpark figures. I think once we get closer to, I'm hoping today we may get closer to how we think our various residents are going to be served, then we can follow up. Obviously, these numbers have to be nailed down, but I don't think we have the full story here to do a proper nailing of those numbers. So that's my opening comment on numbers. I saw two hands to my left. Councillor Hazelton and Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you. I wanted to insert one other number in your mix. I went to our Director of Finance and said, how many tax bills, residential tax bills do you send out? And so I chose to use that number in the numbers that I circulated, 6657. But I think you have summarized it very well in that we should not be focused on the accuracy of these numbers, but we should focus on the notional impact of what these numbers provide. And the document that I circulated was an attempt to provide that notional number and use it. And one of the things that has been a kind of a stumbling block for me to understand, in previous discussions, Councillor Bocek said that he thought only about 25% of the people on his road use curbside, even though they're all entitled to it. My analysis from other areas, geographies within our township, suggested that those numbers might be a little higher, maybe 33%, or a third of the properties that were candidates would use them. And some of the reasons for people not using them are that if they're not permanent residents and they're not here on the day of garbage collection, they're not putting their garbage out the night before and running the risk of raccoons and other things disturbing the waste as they get into it. So what I was trying to do in circulating this is to give us a bit of an understanding of kind of, again, notionally, if we accept that not 100% of the people are using curbside, what is the likelihood of how many people are, and then how many people are not? And it comes down to a shocking number, I think, at the end of the day, where if you do the math, if only a third of the people are using curbside, then that's only about 500 people. And the other, and it doesn't matter if it's 5,500, 6,000, or 6,500, it doesn't matter what the number is. But there's a ton of people that are not using curbside. And that's where we ultimately need to solve the problem for. But I think we also need to recognize that if only a third of our people are using curbside, then when you look at what the district is charging us for curbside, it turns out that it's costing us an arm and a leg for curbside. So if only a third of the properties are using it, then again, notionally, whether the number is 800, 1,000, 1,100, doesn't really matter. It's huge. So curbside is really costing us, again, we'll pick a number, $1,000 per property to deliver curbside. That's just simply taking the numbers the district gave us and doing the simple math. And then if we look at the balance of the numbers out there, it turns out to be a fairly small number. So what I've been trying to do here is help us understand from a magnitude standpoint that what we thought was a bin site problem actually is not a bin site problem. We have a township problem of handling waste, where curbside is costing a fortune, and non-curbside seems like it's cheap, but when you look at what the district is taking away, we have yet to find a solution for it. So I'm going to pause there and let other people talk and offer comments on that, and I'll come back later.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'm not going to dwell too much on numbers, but other than to say that I shared some numbers with the council today, but have over a period. And one of the stats that I think has a fair bit of validity is I went to the Geo Hub at the district and asked Graham Good to provide me with a lot of different information, some of which I sent to you today, but I think I've sent to you in the past. And his assessment is based on what MPAC says. So these are households with a dwelling, or sorry, properties with a dwelling. The number he gives is 5,500 approximately, 55 something. So regardless, it's not 9,000. Where does the 9,000 come from? If you look through the statistics and start sort of figuring it out, there's an assumption being made not only in our township, but at the district, whereby you really need to make allowances. I think it's what they're doing, is making allowances for the future, the growth, and therefore having sufficient disposal capability in the future, so the number and the count is way higher to allow for the future. In our case, one of the problems is that the 9,000 number is predicated on many properties could never be developed, and they're counted. And doesn't necessarily apply to many of the other municipalities, because basically most of the land that's along the shores or inland in Bracebridge, Gravenhurst, et cetera, Muskoka, I will call them Muskoka locations, are probably developable. It's just that ours aren't, primarily because there's a lot of them being counted that are privately owned. They're shoals. People buy the shoals so that nobody else can build on them. That's why they're owned by many people, and they're being, I think, considered in the count. So that's just my comment on the count. But I have been studying it for since I guess this is the third term. If you don't mind, though, the other thing I'd like to do is just give a little bit of a, and I know that this may sound maybe boring, but sometimes history can be helpful. And so I wanted to sort of just do a really quick rundown of how solid waste has been looked after in our township for the last 125 years. And I can do it in little chunks, though.
And you've been on council all that time.
No, and I've been in council all that time. But essentially, we had sort of for 50 years, oh sorry, for 70 years, pretty much all of the same kind of disposal, which was everybody looked after their own garbage. They had basically oil drums that they used to burn garbage, a pit to burn. In the community I come from, there's even an island called Garbage Island, where people would take the garbage and once or twice a month it would get burned. Pretty awful, but that's the sort of thing that was going on. Worse still was during that 70-year period was anything that wouldn't burn, like cans and so on, were rinsed out, and you got in your boat and you went out and sank them. And that was pretty common practice. And even sometimes appliances ended up being sunk, which is, awful to think about, but that is really what happened. We didn't have solid waste services because we were effectively, like certain areas north of here, unorganized, I guess is the best way to describe the system that we had. So that's what we had for 70 years. And I think in the last 50 years, we've had solid waste services. I can't tell you exactly when the solid waste services started, but I'm guessing sort of we were formed in about 1970. So maybe in the mid 70s, late 70s, we started having options available to us, like transfer stations, like bins at marinas. So that's sort of from 1970 to about 2020, we had a 50-year period where, especially from coastal Georgian Bay perspective, worked exceedingly well. There's really no question. We rarely saw problems. Of late, maybe more, because some disposal that was going on that wasn't particularly expected when it was established. So that's sort of one thing that happened. And I think so. We had a pretty good run for about 50 years. In around 2020, there were some problems I think maybe at one Honey Harbor Marina, but in a couple of marinas in Muskoka, there was a bit of a problem, and there were small marinas where people were not looking after the disposal into the bins that were in those marinas, and that was problematic. Unfortunately, um, the District of Muskoka staff approached MOACP about this and said that this is a real problem. All the marinas are a problem, which was unfortunate because now we find ourselves in a very unfortunate situation on coastal Georgian Bay in that our marinas now will not have any bins at the end of this year. And we find ourselves in a predicament, and I certainly hope we can sort this out. But if we can't, we're going to have a mess, and it'll be a real mess. So I just think it's important to, I'd hate to see us go back to burning garbage out on our properties on Georgian Bay and dumping in the bay. That would be a very sad outcome. So I just wanted to give that little bit of history. Maybe not exciting, but that's the garbage story. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Graziano.
Thank you, Your Worship. Bear with me while I get on my video here. Wanted to make some comments with respect to what was said earlier and caution our council today not to conflate two separate issues into one. We've heard that curbside collection is costly and that we have a curbside collection problem, followed by a municipal problem that is a whole issue, and so it seems that some of us are seeking to conflate two separate issues, being curbside and bin site collection. The crux of the matter is that we have a disposable issue or a garbage disposal problem, specifically for water access residents. And I think that we need to focus on that here today. With that said, I am curious to know what's the intended outcome for today's agenda. We've kicked off this call today. We have a representative from the District of Muskoka here present with us. Is this more a Q&A to that representative, Mr. Steele, or do we have a North Star? Are we seeking to solve a problem here today or just continue to perpetuate conversations on the problems that we have? And I'm curious to know what it is that we intend to try to resolve here today. Thank you.
Well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could resolve the solid waste situation? I think we can, with discussion and updates, we know we can get a little closer. There are a number of things we cannot solve today. Mr. Steele or Commissioner Steele volunteered to come over this afternoon to give us an update and also to respond to our questions and where we're at. And I think I see Councillor Predkel has raised his hand. One of the most recent discussions took place about how we're going to resolve or move forward with the Go Home Lake situation. And
if I may, sorry.
You may.
Thank you. The impetus of the question was really because I feel that this may be premature. We have a consultant that we've engaged to provide their feedback on the feasibility of our waste collection going forward, specifically if we were to remove it from the district's as a service provider and go it alone. Would it not make sense that we wait for this response and then deliberate on the best course forward? And secondly, with regards to Go Home Lake, if memory serves me correctly, district has already made a decision on the future of Go Home Lake, and I think subsequent to an article in one of the magazines, or they have now since suggested that there could be changes. I'm not sure, and I'll leave that to Commissioner Steele to confirm. But my understanding is that the district has already shot, and that decision was that it's going to be the on-site collection Lakeside collection, if memory serves me correctly. So again, I might be wrong, but the point that I'm trying to make is that ultimately we do have a consultant that we've engaged, and we don't have the information from that consultant yet, and I wonder what's going to be the outcome of today's agenda. Over to you. Thank you.
Seal Mariotti, could you comment on the consultant side of things, please?
Yeah, certainly, Mayor Kutsia. So we haven't. We've issued the RFP to, I believe, four companies who may or may not be interested. I know one of them has expressed an interest, but I haven't seen anything in detail, and I haven't received any costs. So at this point in time, I don't know what the status is. No.
If microphone, please.
So how do people that you don't know that might be interested in it, how do they learn about it?
So fair point. I mean, it's done through connections and through the various consulting companies that do this kind of work. Consulting companies typically don't look at individual township websites to see what if a municipality has an RFP out for something, which is why normally you will reach out to those companies who will typically do this kind of work. So we've reached out to, I believe, 4 of them.
So how could we get a copy of the RFP and issue it to people who we might know that might be interested?
I can send you a copy right now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Seal, do you want to say anything before I turn it over to Councillor Predko?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think what I'll update, or at least I'll share, and just to clarify the process. So the report was considered by Engineering and Public Works Committee. That resolution will be considered at District Council next week, so nothing is sort of set in stone. Certainly, the report includes recommendations from staff, and Engineering and Public Works Committee did proceed with the recommendations from staff at that time. Not to say that it can't be amended by members of District Council to make adjustments. So that I just wanted to be sure that that was clear. And
we are aware that an amendment is in process at this point.
Correct. Yes, and as you mentioned, there is an amendment that's in the process. The other thing that I'd share is also the report wasn't specific on what level of service we're going to be presented for the lakeside to support Go Home Lake. I do have additional information from the team's analysis since that, now that we have a general direction that we're going to be proceeding with the Go Home Lake transition, we're in a position where we can share, more details, certainly more to come and more consultation to come. But I think the one thing that I'll comment on in that article specifically to Go Home Lake was there was an indication that there was an expectation of 1 hour a week for the lakeside collection, and that clearly wasn't an appropriate. It wasn't an appropriate service level based on feedback we received from the folks that answered the survey. Over 900 people answered the survey last year. That when we put out the signs at the bin sites, and I think that's a significant number. If you look at the stats of the survey response rates, that's a substantial number of folks responding and saying, "Hey, here's how I use this service." And so what is being proposed, and I think, well, more details will come at the District Council meeting, but what's being proposed is 3 days a week for Lakeside to support Go Home Lake, 5 hours in each event. So I know we heard concerns from members of council with respect to queuing and how busy it's going to be. The intent here is to extend the hours so that it operates more available for folks to drop off materials when it's appropriate for them. And I did share, I think, at committee, if I remember correctly, a comparison with Cashie Lake in Gravenhurst, which is an inland lake. Cashie Lake supports about 314 water access properties. Go Home Lake supports about 400 water access properties inland. The Cashie Lake events are 3 hours on Sundays and 1.5 hours on Wednesdays, and there haven't been issues of queuing or managing the throughput. And so that's a total of 4.5 hours, Your Worship, compared to what we're proposing to start with is 15 hours for Go Home Lake to really spread that, spread the events around so that, you know, not everyone's rushing in for the 1 hour. And so I just wanted to share that because I think that's an important thing to at least set the level of what can be expected next week, Your Worship.
And I'm just going to add one question before I get to Councillor Predko, and that I believe, based on your studies last year, that at Lakeside Pickup, you were collecting the range of 20 or 25% of what you used to collect at the bins that were at those particular sites.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think that sounds about right. What we're seeing is a significant drop in those materials for a number of reasons. Number one, people are only allowed to bring their bag limits, so they can't bring an entire trailer and drop material off. But also it avoids situations where folks who aren't even necessarily entitled to use that service are dropping materials off. And I think to go back to Councillor Hazelton's comment with respect to the use of curbside, we suspect that once the bins are removed, there'll be a higher uptake of curbside collection, inevitably, because people will have to choose, do I put it out at the curb or a road, to use your term? Am I putting it out at the road, or am I going to drop it off at a depot? So I would suspect that most people would choose to do that. And they certainly have the opportunity to put it out in a bare bin on a Sunday night, and then the drivers open the bare bin on the collection day. And so that happens across many properties across Muskoka, not just Georgian Bay.
All right, thank you. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. So just a couple of comments, and off the top, I understand Councillor Graziano's comments about, is this premature given we have an RFP, but I think given the timing of changes that are happening in waste collection in the township in 2025, I think we need to have answers, and we need to have a plan going forward, regardless of the status of the RFP, because we don't know what the outcome of the RFP will be in 2025, and we need to maintain service levels for our residents. What I was going to raise as questions has primarily already been answered by Commissioner Steele, but there are details that I don't think we have yet, and I think that is an important piece to communicate back to residents so that they have a different level of comfort and different level of understanding of what is intended from the district. I think the 1 hour per week is looking at the district's collection webpage with different lakeside events. Many of them are 1 hour per week, and I think that's where the inference came from the Cottage Association, in a vacuum of other information that they could rely on. I do have a question, and it can't be answered today, and that's where we need to have more details going forward as you go through to your council decision. But you have a lot of private roads listed for potential curbside collection, and I'm not sure the feasibility of those roads, and yet they're on the report. So I'm not sure, for council making a decision on waste collection on private roads, if they have enough information to make a fully informed decision. Because the roads that I know of that are being listed on the report don't have good access from the public road. They may have barriers. They are not four-season roads, and they may just have navigational issues for large trucks. I know, Councillor Steele, we talked about that a little bit on the phone, but it still would seem to be a potential challenge. And the other question, and I wanted to raise, I did want to comment that Councillor Cooper's comments and concerns about what it was like before we had waste collection has been something that's been brought to my attention from Go Home Lake residents, old-time Go Home Lake residents, frequently that people regularly burned their garbage. They regularly sank things to the bottom of the lake, and they regularly dumped things like refrigerators out in the backwoods. So that's where a lot of the concern is, that if we're decreasing the service levels, that people will resort to these, you know, unsavory alternative methods of eliminating their waste. And so two more quick questions, and they're both Go Home Lake related, but I know that we want to have a more fulsome, broader conversation about waste collection in the future. But one of the things you were talking about with lakeside collection was people have to produce a document that describes that they are eligible to drop something off at the lakeside collection. Where the parking lot is at Miners Bay, where the collection should take place, people will be arriving by car, both from Miners Bay Marina as well as Go Home Lake Marina. So how will those residents that come by car that have legitimately transferred across from a lake water access property provide proof to the waste collectors that they are eligible to drop off their garbage at that site, especially if there's a large number of people that are coming not by a visible water access but by a vehicle? And I'm wondering if you could just quickly provide an answer for that, Commissioner Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. So an excellent question. The way Lakeside works is the attendants or the drivers have a list of eligible properties. And so provided that someone is on the list of eligible properties, they just would have to explain to the driver what their property was. So for example, if they got there via car or they got there via boat, it's irrelevant. They just ask them to confirm who they are and what their property is, and then they check the list on that basis. And again, it has worked fairly well. Our first lakeside event started in 2022, or even earlier than that, I think. And it actually works quite well. And for the busier sites, we do have a district employee that's also helping manage the folks arriving. And if Your Worship, if you don't mind, I'll just mention about the private roads concerns that Councillor Predko mentioned. The staff are out, our staff are out assessing the roads to look at feasibility of drop off. We do have a number of private roads across the district that are seasonally serviced. And so those are, you know, they're certainly when they shut down for the winter, or if they're not winter maintained, then those folks would be asked to drop off material at a depot or a drop off location. And so concerns about feasibility of that, seasonally, we have a system in place. And the other piece is, as part of our last contract that we engaged GFL to provide the service, they actually have 3 different sizes of trucks that run the district roads. They have the large, sort of big 40 ton garbage trucks that you would see in your regular neighborhood. They have a smaller, medium size garbage truck, but then they have a mini garbage truck that is really no bigger than a small pickup or a large pickup truck. And so I can't speak to the specific roads that Councillor Predko mentioned about Go Home Lake, but certainly we have the vehicle infrastructure that can support curbside or roadside collection in areas that are a little bit more constrained. And that's the reason why we selected, why we requested 3 different sizes of vehicles, to allow that broader flexibility across the district's system. So I just wanted to mention that because I think that's an important distinction. And certainly there are instances where it's just not possible, but we could either work with the property owners to make sure that it is possible, or we would direct them to either a lakeside event or the closest depot. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then just one additional question is, our council passed a motion back in the fall for an evaluation and feasibility report on a depot in the area of Go Home Lake Road. And I'm wondering if there has been any progress on that report.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I guess where I'll start with that is, as part of our solid waste master plan, we're doing a service level review. And so depot locations and or drop-off locations will be assessed through that. And that request would be assessed at the same time as that. But I think the one thing that I would suggest, and I think I spoke to the mayor about this previously, is if you think about the waste vehicle there for 5 or 6 hours, 5 hours at an event, that's actually not that different than an actual depot with specific hours. And so our thought is that this is a trial of to see what the utilization would be, the feasible hours, and then as part of the solid waste master plan, we would assess whether an additional permanent depot was appropriate. I think the other piece that I'll mention is that the South Gibson Lake depot it's in that area. And so that is another option that if folks had materials to drop off and it wasn't at the same time as the Lakeside event, they still have the opportunity to bring materials to South Gibson as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, just a quick observation to begin with over the history of garbage in our area and how it was disposed of. I think we got to consider that 70 years ago plus the nature of garbage was different than it is today and was significantly much more biodegradable if it was thrown into the bush. Not that that makes it any better, but the nature of waste today and being a huge proportion being plastics makes it a very, very difficult item to a product to try and dispose of. And I think we've got a much significantly higher population that produces more garbage per capita. Something that we got to keep considering as we go along here. Mr. Steele, I do have a couple points of clarification. The mayor mentioned that with Lakeside collection that's currently in place, did I hear correctly that the volume of garbage has dropped by 25% or is only 25%?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the number he used was that it's down, it's 25% of the original amounts.
Which leads to my questioning as to what's happened to the other 75%, and that is concerning. On the one hand, it's good to see, I guess, encouraging, but it also means 75% is going somewhere. The rest of it is, and I'd be very curious to know where that's going, and that could be a very, very detrimental sidebar to everything we're doing here. If we're encouraging people to move garbage onto places where it shouldn't be going, then that's not helping the situation at all. It's matter of fact, it's making it worse. And then my other question is one I think it's been asked before. I think we've had clarification, but I need to, the risk of sounding repetitive. Our garbage, the budget for garbage pickup for our municipality, is it a per capita amount or based on per capita or based on just a general amount?
Both. Commissioner Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think I'll answer the second question first. So back in 2013, just with respect to how waste is paid for all district residents, there was a solid waste financial management committee struck in 2013, or sorry, before 2013. They concluded in 2013, and that was the outcome of that committee was to determine how solid waste is paid for by taxpayers, and the result was to apply a area special levy for each area municipality. And what that means is that the overall value of the cost to provide the program is split amongst the assessed value of the area municipal properties. And so so it's not per capita and it's not per person, it's not per property. It's based on an overall assessed value similar to property taxes, where it's split amongst the assessed value of the properties in the municipality. And I've forgotten the other question.
Well, no, that was all, it all blended together. So you've answered my question. So it's similar to the way the OPP budget is set up as well, right?
Somewhat, yes.
Scary on both points.
I mean,
Okay.
just if I can just add in further, when the budget is prepared by district, they basically have 3 columns. And the one column, the last column is disposal and diversion, and they charge that out, and they charge it out per unit, is how they calculate it, and then that's where they have the 9,000 figure. And if memory serves, it's about $100 per unit, and then depending upon how many units are in your township, that's how much your township or town gets charged. So that's like, that's for disposal diversion. So that's this charge that everybody shares in because that's the final handling of the garbage, if we can put it that way. They also have a charge for curbside that they calculate, and that's, you know, and I'm just going to be really ballparking here, but it's in the range of $200 per unit. And that's, again, across Muskoka. So the number of units that receive curbside service, they'll multiply that. In our case, it's 1,917 times roughly $200 equals $380,000. I mean, I'm ballparking, but and then the third is what they call non-curbside pickup. And that's when they take all the charges that are involved with the transfer stations, the waste depots, in our case, the bins sites, and they add that all up. In our case, it's over $1 million. Significantly higher. I mean, the closest other, Bracebridge and Gravenhurst in the 400 range, 400,000. So ours is significantly higher because that's how most of our garbage is collected. And then they add it all up and they come up with a grand total. In our case, $2,300,000 for 2025. And then that's added to our tax base that's paid by assessment. That's the current system.
And just can I just clarify, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, per unit is per property, per residence, per what?
Well,
You say per unit.
Well,
the
the unit in theory is a dwelling, but they also include vacant lots, and I suspect Crown land in that count. But that's a system that was designed, you know, a dozen or more years ago. That's certainly not Commissioner Steele's fault.
But it doesn't mean we can't blame him since he's here.
Oh, we can blame him, but he can duck that one. But I think it's something, I think it has to be part of what we visit as we go through this going forward. The other question that you forgot, but I want to hear Commissioner Steele's answer again, is what happened to the other 75% of the waste that is not being collected at Lakeside to the best of their knowledge at this point?
Thank you, Your Worship. And I did think about it after I turned my microphone off. So what we're seeing is increased traffic at the transfer stations, drop-off depots, etc. So folks are dropping materials off where they're supposed to be, and we're receiving tipping fees for those. And so the benefit there is that taxpayers aren't paying for folks who aren't entitled to drop material off at the waste transfer stations. Those revenues get blended back into the system and support the system. So a commercial operator who chooses to bring material to a transfer station is paying a tipping fee. Those fees get put back into the system and reduce the overall cost to the district taxpayer. What we're also suspecting is a lot of that material is going to private waste disposal firms because our tipping fees are much more expensive than typical industry tipping fees, because our landfill is going to be so expensive to replace when we get there. And so for comparison, a tipping fee is maybe $100, a couple $100, depending on where you go. Our mixed waste tipping fee is $500 a ton. And so the importance of that is to ensure that people are diverting their material. Mixed waste is garbage mixed with recyclables, with organics, etc. And so we certainly don't want to use up space in the landfill for materials that shouldn't be there. And so if folks choose not to separate their materials and not and bring it all in one single load, then they have to pay a higher fee, because we would prefer them to divert those materials. And that really, in the end, Your Worship, is to maintain the longevity of the landfill.
Thank you.
Councillor Bochek, sorry.
Thank you, and through Your Worship, James, thanks for taking the time today to come and see us and answer some questions. My video may freeze. I'm on Starlink, and I think Elon Musk has probably given me 25% of what I should have. So if I just freeze, that's just my computer. James, I'm wondering if you could paint a picture for us on, outside of curbside collection, what will be in place in the way of, I guess, supervised or manned depots, and what area are those depots projected to service? In other words, if there's going to be a manned depot in Honey Harbor, what do you expect the service area to be for that bin site? So maybe we could start with the number of bin sites, their location, and what your projected usage would be on those sites.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll start with, well, I guess I'll outline. So there was a financial scenarios report that came to District Council late last year that spoke to what the recommendations were from a financial perspective. The outcome of that was to move to 4 supervised depots and/or transfer stations across the township, extending curbside collection to areas that are possible within the township, and then moving to lakeside collection as part of the depot, bin site transition project. And so the depots that we're planning on proceeding with are Honey Harbor Depot, which already exists today. Certainly the hours will need to be adjusted if there's a higher volume of traffic that's expected, and that's part of our process. South Gibson exists today and is a supervised depot. Tower Road and Baxter would continue to operate as transfer stations, and those would be the drop-off locations. There is a unsupervised depot at 12 Mile Bay, but given that the decision to move to 4 supervised facilities across the township, the proposal is to close 12 Mile Bay Depot through this season as part of the transition to the financial scenarios that were considered last year.
Councillor Bochek, I've seen your lips move, but I'm not hearing anything.
Sorry, I'm back now. I'm just wondering, Mr. Steele, with the bin sites that are projected to be, which it sounds like there's going to be 4, you're going to have a huge increase in your tonnage coming to those sites. I'm wondering if you have any projections on what you expect to see, because all of a sudden a lot of people that would, maybe divert their solid waste are going to be using these depots now, including the people that have curbside.
Through your worship. So I'm just pulling up the report, the financial scenarios report, because I believe it speaks to that. Just give me 1 second. So we've estimated that the depots will get about 370 tons in the new scenario without the curbside collection. And what that means is any material that was previously at a bin site has now been put into, assume that it's going to be managed by the depots or transfer stations. And so that's a fairly significant increase from the current tonnage, but we're expecting that not all that material will land there, mainly because it'll be much less expensive for folks, especially contractors or commercial operations, to take it to a commercial disposal facility. And so we've used those numbers to do the financial comparison, but we're expecting that the numbers would be substantially less.
Okay.
I don't have any specific details beyond that.
So one last question, if I may. If you're removing the bins from the marinas in Honey Harbor, that's going to put that stress onto the depot that's in Honey Harbor, because most people will come in and take it to that depot. I don't think there's the physical space right now. On any given weekend, those bins are completely full. People have to go up to Baxter. Is there any plan on increasing the area in Honey Harbor and increasing the number of bins?
Through your worship, excuse me. The intention is to monitor and then make adjustments to the system. If we needed to expand Honey Harbor to accommodate the increased volume of traffic, then that certainly is something that's in the cards. It's just that we don't know for sure where we're going to land at this point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to make a few comments before we'll start the second round with Councilors Graziano and Hazelton. I appreciated Councillor Cooper's history, and I just wanted to add a little bit to it. I mean, I have certainly been told by enough people in the past that, yeah, there were three things they did with their garbage. They either sank it, they burnt it, or they buried it. None of which quite follow by today's standards of being environmentally responsible, but I think it might have been Councillor Jarvis, I forget who made the comment. Our population then was significantly lower than it is now, and our garbage was probably less offensive than it is now, especially given all the plastics and weird and wonderful chemicals that have been invented in the last half century. I can remember being in the area where there were, I'll call it a different side of roadside collection. There were informal dumps, and usually there would be by a little mini cliff or something, and everybody just walked up to the edge and tossed it. And then in the evenings, that would be a great place to take your guests if they wanted to see a bear. Again, not the sort of approach that we'd encourage now. I do remember a time when there were bin sites, if I can call them that, at the side of the road on the 400 interchanges, and the large bin site collection areas, and those weren't considered that successful and eventually closed down simply because people were leaving anything and everything there. Lots of construction materials, mattresses, and, in spite of the signs, the convenience was just too tempting for many of a person, and that's when the bin sites got moved to the marinas and places like that in our area. Also, the story I understand about why we're in this situation now is once upon a time back in one of the roadside bin sites in Muskoka, there was a mini oil spill, and the MECP was dutifully informed, and they say, yeah, but this isn't a licensed bin site. And districts say, well, yeah, well, we got 88 other ones. And that's how this whole thing has started. Which leads me to one of my other comments, and that is what I consider significant inequity by the province in the way they're treating the waste materials being generated by water access only residents and other cottagers and the like, compared to other jurisdictions and the way they handle things. Like they have a regulation 351 that says yachters can leave their must be provided with a place to dispose of their garbage at a marina. But apparently they don't think cottagers are pleasure boaters. It makes no sense to me. It's unfair. This was being actively pursued with the MECP, and then they decided to call an election, and everything stops. And so that conversation can't continue until March. Color me frustrated. And the other thing is that they being the province said, well, if the district is providing bins at marinas, they have to get ECAs. But for some reason, bins that are provided at condominiums, trailer parks, and other facilities don't need ECAs. The bins that are provided at yacht havens don't need ECAs. Again, inequity, and I don't understand why we have that. We have to recognize that's part of our problem. The third thing I want to mention is historically, our township has produced more garbage per capita than the other municipalities in the district by a significant amount. And I don't believe that that's the fault of 90-odd% of our residents, because I think most of our residents are quite responsible with their waste management most of the time. But we have allowed visitors, we've allowed contractors, we've allowed people doing their renovations, et cetera, retailers, to take advantage of our bin sites without any control. So even though the bins are provided for retail waste, they've been receiving a significant amount of non-retail waste. And I think one of the things I heard from Commissioner Steele, and I think it's important, is that when they have replaced bin sites with lakeside pickup or such services, some of that volume that was before going to the bin sites before is now going to the transfer station as commercial waste or other excess waste. It's not, I'll call it normal residential waste. And I think that's important that we understand that when these changes are being implemented, there will be less waste collected. Let me call it free of charge. When I say free of charge to the person leaving the waste behind, obviously it's all been paid for by our residents through their taxes. And I think we have to remember these things as we go forward, that what we're trying to do is be environmentally responsible as well as financially responsible in the solutions we come up with. And I believe that the district is actually making changes that are such. However, I also believe that we as a township can encourage some other changes that will complement the changes the district are making, if I can put it that way. And that, amongst other things in my mind, that includes continuing to pursue the possibility of waste collection at marinas. Because with all due respect to everyone involved, it only makes sense. And there's already a regulation in place that says we can do it. And we just have to get around a couple individuals who think that their interpretation makes more sense than our interpretation. Anyway, I think we got to continue down those roads. I think that one of the most immediate things that came up, of course, was the most recent thing that came up was the Go Home Lake situation. I'm glad that that's being addressed. I think we also have to understand that there's some flexibility. We are aware that the district and the services they provided to other municipalities, the hours have changed or the type of service has changed as people get used to it, and they say, well, actually, this isn't the best routine. Maybe we should change the pickup time or the length of hours used and all that stuff. So I'm hopeful that will continue. And with that, I want to start round two, and I have Councillor Graziano, who's had his hand up for quite some time. So I'm going to go over to Councillor Graziano, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think Councillor Hazelton was first. I'm happy to make way for Councillor Hazelton, followed by myself if he wishes to speak first. So, Councillor Hazelton.
Well, your hand was up before his, but so
Fair enough. I mean, my points aren't all long. We heard from the district that a master plan was going to come out to assess the feasibility of bin sites for Go Home Lake after the sorry, my apologies, my cell phone. After the lakeside collection was already well underway, and I wonder where's the logic in that. I would assume that the master plan would predate the decision on what would happen for Go Home Lake. Alternatively, the approach that is currently being taken, specifically if in the event that the PW committee's recommendations are passed through council or district council, is going to cause an immense amount of pain and havoc to the Go Home Lake community. After which, if in the event that it's unsuccessful, the district might endeavor to pivot and look at better ways of servicing that community. I'm a little concerned with this approach, frankly speaking, if I can. I think that we should try to find a solution that is going to work the first time around rather than causing absolute chaos to the community, or what I'm going to assume is going to be absolute chaos, followed by then perhaps adjusting accordingly. The other issue is, I mean, there were some comparisons made with respect to another lake. I haven't endeavored to review the lake to determine how many drop-off points there are, what kind of infrastructure supports this type of approach, and so on and so on. We've heard from Councillor Predko that Go Home Lake has two different marinas, of which one of which is quite far away, and there's a channel that people will have to travel through, and it can be precarious at times in order to get to Miners Bay, where the lakeside collection is going to be parked. So I wonder whether district is making a hasty decision by implementing a plan and then kind of while that's happening, And while it's impacting our residents, they are then looking at a master plan to determine whether or not a bin site would make sense. So my thoughts with regards to what some of the comments that I've heard, and I think this is kind of where we stand with our colleagues at the district, is unfortunately it seems that their solutions with regards to our garbage collection problem, specifically for water access residents, tend to perhaps be enacted as a Band-Aid solution in the hopes that at some point they can assess what's going to make it best. And I think we still have time to review really what makes sense for our communities. And I endeavor to challenge the district to put some thought behind what really is going to help our communities, and be be a program that we can work with on an ongoing basis rather than an oops, we made a mistake, let's try to fix it after the fact. Thank you.
Mr. Steele?
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the question from Councillor Graziano. I think what I would say is it's not a situation where we haven't thought it through. We've completed the transition of 66 bin sites so far. We have lessons learned throughout that process. One of the key components of the entire process is to make sure there's flexibility to make adjustments. I think the important aspect of that is that there's no true indication of who's using these sites because they're totally uncontrolled. And so at some point one has to decide, are we going to sit and analyze data that we can't get access to? Because I'm not sure how you would go and find out who is dropping materials off at every site to make sure you had that data. Or do you have sufficient data to make a judgment call, maintain flexibility to make adjustments, and then make those adjustments, of course. I think that's
As a follow,
sorry.
sorry.
That's an important distinction. I think the other piece, and I'll go back to the master plan, is the master plan is to look at the waste system between now and the 30 years from now. And so it's not something that's a tomorrow thing. It's between now and 30 years from now. But one of the things that we have across the district is an inequity with respect to service level for drop-off facilities. And we've got locations where there are multiple drop-off facilities within 10, 15 minutes from each other. And in other areas where someone has to drive a half hour to 45 minutes to drop off materials. And so that service level review will look at the entire system of drop-off locations to come up with what a reasonable solution would be based on the usage, based on the number, the locations, and what a reasonable drive time is. And I know that I've heard many times that some of the folks in coastal Georgian Bay have long boat ride times. But I think it's important and that's absolutely recognized, but I think it's also important to recognize that we will use a comparison of drive times to determine appropriate service levels, because inevitably when folks get to the shore, they have to drive anyway. And it's not to say that I don't respect the fact that folks have to adjust based on where their seasonal property or their house is located. But I think it's also important to say that there will be some level of inequity. But what we're hoping to do through the master plan is to at least set an appropriate level of service so that it's respectful of taxpayer dollars, because every facility that's opened, every facility that's commissioned, every facility that is operating, it comes with a cost. And so we have to look at, what taxpayers would like to invest their money in. And if it's a depot, 10 minutes from each other, is that a good use of taxpayer dollars? That's for district council to decide. But I think what we would do through the master plan is to complete that service level review, make recommendations on what an appropriate service level is, where there are gaps in the system to make sure that the community is supported, and then implement those changes. And so the suggestion that we haven't thought this through, I just have to take exception to that, because there has been a significant amount of effort that's been thought through specifically for Georgian Bay, because when you think about all the consultation that's happened with the Township of Georgian Bay, the fact that District Council supported the Township by deferring any bin site transitions to later on in the process, The needs and wants study was supported by the district for the township to come up with their solutions. There's a number of things that have already happened to inform where we are today. But the fact of the matter is we have direction from the ministry to remove the sites by 2026. And so we can't wait till the last minute. And so inevitably, that's why we have to make a move. And I think I just go back to my comments about, and I apologize, Your Worship, I'm taking a long time, but I think I go back to my comments about, help me understand why you think a truck at a landing is different than a depot. What I would argue is that it's actually not that significantly different if you're dropping off household waste. You have an attendant, you have the ability to drop off materials, you hand in, you let them know where your property is, and you drop those materials off. And so I guess I would just ask you to consider that and perhaps think about what the difference between dropping off a material at Honey Harbor Depot versus dropping off at a garbage truck parked on a landing would be, and whether one would be more convenient than the other. And thank you for that, Your Worship.
Follow up, Your Worship, if I may. First of all, Commissioner Steele, thank you for your comments. The question that you posed with regards to what would the difference be between a bin site versus a waterside drop-off location is assuming that we would look at one location for a bin site rather than considering potentially two, or alternatively, the size of the bin site as well. I don't know how many trucks you endeavor to bring with how many bins simultaneously, but I know that there's multiple bins at any given site. If I look at 33, I think there's about 6 in total, maybe 8. So I just don't know what your intentions are with regards to the water access drop off. But I did some simple math. And 400 residents within 11 hours is 36 residents per hour that truck is going to service, which is essentially 1 resident per minute, assuming that it captures all 400 residents within the time and dates that you have allocated towards the drop-off. And in addition to that, we also heard you identify the fact that the operator is going to have to verify these people. Now, I know what your verification process looks like because I endeavor to go through the Baxter transfer station all the time, and I'm asked to show ID at times. I'm asked to show a tax roll or some kind of identifiable documentation that suggests I'm a ratepayer within the District of Muskoka. And so what I see causing a problem here, and as you articulated, you've already given this much thought and have ironed out all the kinks, is if we're looking at 1 person per minute, and that person is delayed through verification, or if they fumble and say, sorry, I didn't bring an ID, or any kind of tax roll documentation, and they're sent back, that's going to cause some very frustrated people. It's also going to delay the operator from being able to then address the next person who's coming in that next minute, and the next person is coming in the next minute. So if it takes that operator 10 minutes to address an identification problem where there's a lineup of 9 more people now waiting, and you can understand as that kind of at scale will magnify and start to become a problem. And so, again, I don't know how many trucks you're intending on bringing at any given time for Go Home Lake and or any of the other Georgian Bay communities. But what I'm seeing through the simple math is likely going to be somewhat problematic. And I can almost be assured that the councillors within this municipality are going to start to receive some pretty abrasive phone calls because of it and or emails. Thank you.
Through Your Worship, if it's acceptable, I'd like to put up a slide to share with the council, but also the public, and it really works through what our calculated utilization would be for those facilities, what the throughput would be, what the recommended number of hours of service would be given our historical understanding of the usage. Just if that's okay, Mr. Chair. So what you can see on the screen here is basically the typical rundown of how we determine what an appropriate level of service is based on the number of properties that we believe are serviced by that location. We assume and we've seen this, it's very consistent, about 40% of the eligible properties use any particular event at any one time. And so if you look at that calculation, about 400 properties are serviced, about 40% of that works out to about 160 users per service. And then what we assume for on average is about 40 users per hour, which for Go Home Lake works out to about 4 hours of service per week. Now, recognizing some of the complicating factors that Councillor Predko's shared, members of the community have shared, we are proposing these stats, and really what it is 5 hours per day for 3 days a week. So that's 15 hours total. So that's triple what our normal operation would have indicated for a level of service. And so I appreciate the concerns that you've raised about throughput and the driver checking things and causing a slowdown, but we've got 3 times the amount of time than we would normally allocate for this site versus any other site that we have across the district. And we have, like I said, we've transitioned 60 sites already, 66 sites across the district. So we have some real data to look at what an appropriate level of service is. And so I think to answer the councillor's question, there has been a significant amount of thought put into this. And also we've heard the concerns from the community. It hasn't gone unanswered. The answer is that we're looking at 3 times the level of service for Go Home Lake that we would normally provide. And that allows us to assess the whether that level of service is appropriate. And if adjustments need to be made, then absolutely we will look at that. What we suspect is this is absolutely over-serviced, and at some point the likelihood is that the service will get reduced, but we'll have real data that goes along with that. The intention is not to reduce the level of service, it's just to make sure that it's appropriate based on the needs of the community. And so with that, Your Worship, I'm just hoping that helps answer the question.
Well, I think one other part that I think was part of Councillor Graziano's question is, what's the capacity of one of these trucks versus a bin?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think what I would say is that these are the large compacting garbage trucks, and so they're designed to collect residential curbside 8 hours a day and then go to the transfer station once a day. There is more than likely far more capacity in the trucks than is going to be required by any one event.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
Thank you. Oh, James, again, thank you very much for being here. I'd like to pick your brains a little bit more on some numbers here, if I could. So we had the mayor talk to us about disposal and diversion spread across the township. There's 2 ways, two factors in that. I don't know how you come up with it, but you have your disposal diversion numbers. And I'm pretty sure you and I had a conversation a while ago that when I was asking you, well, if we have this disposal diversion number, how do we apportion that to curbside and non-curbside? And maybe you could just answer, like, it's being spread across the township, but how does that happen?
Through Your Worship, so the way the waste levy is calculated, and again, that's something that was set by District Council in 2013. The disposal and diversion applies to all properties across the district, and it's divided. But what I'll say is that the costs are allocated based on the number of potential service properties. I know Councillor Cooper mentioned about vacant properties and not utilizing it, but I think the importance there is that having appropriate disposal locations, long-term capacity in the landfill, etc., supports every property across the district. And so those are apportioned based on the properties across the district. That total is put into the the levy calculation, which is, as the mayor mentioned, about $2.3 million for 2025 for the Township of Georgian Bay, and then it's apportioned out based on the assessed value of the property. So it's not someone gets curbside, they pay a premium. Someone doesn't get curbside, they don't pay a premium. It's spread out like taxation.
So thank you for that. So the key there then is you have a number 91 or 9019 and you use that somehow. We end up with some disposal diversion number, but at the end of the day, that's spread across the asset base of our township as a mill rate. So when we heard earlier that curbside, for example, is roughly $200 across the district, if you apportion that disposal diversion across the entire township, that's a very significant uplift on curbside and non-curbside. Because if the end objective is to say, what is it really costing me for curbside? You've got to spread that number across the curbside, the $200 then plus, right? Because that's being billed out as in a mill rate. So everybody who's doing curbside, they're not paying $200. It's not, our township is not being assessed $200 per curbside location. It's being assessed $200 per curbside location, 100% of the curbside, by the way, that's eligible, plus a spread of the diversion disposal, right?
Through your worship, so you're absolutely correct. So the way it works is the curbside costs are the curbside costs, so we know how many stops there are. And so based on those numbers of stops, we have a curbside allocation. Non-curbside is for dumpster sites, transfer stations, and depots. And so that's about $1 million as the mayor mentioned. And then the disposal diversion component for that is about $880,000. All those numbers are added together, and then there's a single levy that's applied across the assessed value of the township. And so you take the 2.2 million, divide it by the total assessment, you get a mill rate, and then everyone gets it on their property taxes as a single mill rate.
Okay, so I copied you in on the model or the document that I produced today. Hopefully you had a chance to go through it, perhaps not in detail, but ultimately what I was trying to do is come up with the realization that although we started off this discussion 6 years ago saying we're going to take bins away, what my math is now saying is unless we get a huge bump in usage of curbside, the actual cost per property using curbside is obscene, and we have a township problem of how do we deal with waste across the board. And it sounds to me like your ideas of going to service private road on curbside may be a good solution. But I guess if I'm looking at today, you know, you could follow the math or whether you agree with it or not, you know, somewhat academic. It's just simply calculations. But if the true cost of curbside today is $1,000 per property that uses it, I might offer that having a barge go around and do dockside pickup out on the bay probably is cheaper than $1,000 per dock. So maybe we should be entertaining that. I know that's somewhat tongue-in-cheek suggesting it, but I guess where I'm going with ultimately with this thing is we have a model today and we need help with this model because you are going to take away all of the waste services for water access properties, and you're not coming up with a strategy that addresses that. And, you know, we can argue whether or not this thing at Go Home Lake is going to work or not, but none of the marinas that I've spoken to suggest that having a garbage truck come in and park there for a little while, a few days a week is going to solve the problem. Oh, by the way, something you need to put into your calculations. As I understand it, district councilors are paid mileage to go from here to the district. That's interesting. What's more interesting is they're paid 6 times that mileage. Is it 5 or 6 times that mileage for your boat? Six times that mileage for your boat. So when you are calculating how long somebody has to travel by boat to get to a potential drop-off location, and this would apply to Go Home Lake as well, you should probably put in that 6 times factor. So if it takes somebody on Go Home Lake 5 minutes to drive down to the marina, it's probably a lot more than that going down that narrow channel between Go Home Lake Marina and and Miners Bay Marina. But if you're traveling 5 minutes by boat, that's 30 minutes by car equivalent. So I think you want to add that in because that's one of the big concerns on Go Home Lake. But anyways, I'm come back to the model that we have, which spreads through a mill rate, all of the costs in the township, is going to start to become a real problem. In fact, it is right now, but it's going to be a real problem where you're completely removing services from a substantial portion of the township, and where we already know that that substantial portion, all of the marinas in Honey Harbor, are actively embracing and exploring the concept of a private service, which every lift company and waste company out there says they have all the licenses in place to do it on a private basis for those marinas. So basically what we're saying is you're taking away all of the services for water access cottages. There's no new services coming in. How do we figure out a billing structure that reflects the fact that you're taking away all these services? And if we can't figure that part out, then maybe everybody in Georgian Bay should say, I want dockside pickup. I mean, how do we solve that problem? And is that part of the discussion that you're going through, or is that just kind of noise level and it's kind of too bad, so sad, you know, you got a water access place?
Through your worship, I think what I'll start with is there's an approved level of service that for the alternatives that are related to the bin sites. And so I appreciate that folks feel like that they had this access 24/7 unlimited disposal capacity historically. The fact is that's just not possible any longer. And so the alternatives that are approved by district council include transition to curbside, transition to common collection points, transition to lakeside collection, and drop-off facilities. Those are the 4 options that are on the table. Anything beyond that are not part of staff's consideration because those are ministry approved. They'll meet the requirements of our ECAs and or compliance from the Ministry of the Environment, and they're financially sustainable. I think an important aspect, because you're talking about the finances and the costs, we did go through that detailed financial exercise in September last year, and we looked at 3 different scenarios. Scenario 1 was to just have 2 drop-off depots, 2 transfer stations across the township. Scenario 2 was 4 drop-off locations across the township. And then scenario 3 was a blend of drop-off, curbside, and lakeside to support the community. The scenario that was selected was a balanced scenario that continues to provide levels of service. And I listened to your solid waste workshop when you had it last summer, and there was a blend of concerns from councillors about service level reductions, removing curbside, cost of service, and that sort of thing. And all of that information was presented in that report in September, was considered by Public Works Committee, and then ultimately ratified by District Council last September or in October last year. And so I've heard you about or we've heard you about the cost to provide the service and whether curbside's appropriate or not, whether it's appropriate for the Township of Georgian Bay and the nature of the use. We've heard all that, and we responded by providing these detailed financial analysis that was requested. Ultimately, that's the decision that District Council made, was to go with scenario 3. We also received feedback from, I believe, from the Township of Georgian Bay before it was considered at District Council. And, you know, there was no indication at that time that scenario 3 was inappropriate. And so I just wanted to be clear that we have heard the concerns that you've raised. And certainly, as an example, Lake of Bays has drop off only. They're the least expensive service or the least expensive service across the district. They also have the lowest disposal rates across the district. And so what I would say is if there's an appetite for to request the district to consider moving to drop-off facilities only, I think that's absolutely in the cards. We do have a resolution from council to move to scenario 3, which is a blend of curbside and lakeside and drop-off facilities. And so I guess before I finish, and I apologize for going on long, I think it's important to know that we can only provide services that are approved by the Ministry of the Environment. The bin sites are not approved by the Ministry of the Environment. The bin sites, we have direction from the ministry to remove the bin sites. And so that, keeping the bin sites as they are, and I think we've talked about that before. And I think even Chris Hyde, when he was here last summer, shared that exact fact. They can't exist the way they are. And so we're looking at coming up with alternative services that match the requirements of the environmental legislation. I fully expect that everyone is not going to be happy with the transition, but I can't provide a service that's actually not compliant with legislation. And I think the last thing I'll say is that scenario 3 did result in a reduction in costs to the township. I believe it was going to scenario 3 worked out to a reduction in cost of about 18% year over year. If you selected scenario 1, which is 2 drop-off facilities, it would have been a reduction of 50% off the levy. And so those are all things that were considered as part of that financial analysis, Councillor. And again, if there's a desire from the township council or members of district council that sit at the township, if there's a desire to move to a level of service similar to Lake of Bays, then we can certainly look at that and provide that and put a proposal together. It's not something that's off the table. We've been given the direction by district council to move forward with this. Thank you, your work.
Thank you. Councillor, you want more?
Follow-up. Could you share with us what you figure the typical drive times are to transfer stations? Planned and acceptable?
Through you, your worship. So what we're seeing is based on the drive time analysis, that if there's a facility that's more than 10 minutes drive time away, then it's appropriate to provide another level of service. So Lakeside, for example. And so for the Miners Bay Depot or the Miners Bay location, we're proposing that Lakeside service, which is really within the 10-minute drive time, but understanding the complexities of the system that we're proposing to implement Lakeside there.
So if I could ask another question here, is 10 minutes a guideline, or if it was in a 10 or 15 minute, would you consider that acceptable, reasonable? And let me expand on that. You've already heard from Councillor Bocek, who's concerned about the Honey Harbor Road bin site, transfer site, whatever you want to call it, having capacity problems. The drive time from the Honey Harbor Depot to the South Bay Road transfer site is 13 minutes. There is no issue for capacity at that South Bay Road transfer site. I'm wondering if we're all up for hard decisions, then why would we maintain an expensive transfer site on Honey Harbor Road when it's kind of within the drive time expectations for most of the users to go straight to the South Bay Road location?
Through your worship, certainly available to be on the table.
Okay. Because one of the things that, so as I'm sure you can understand, one of the things that we are always trying to juggle here with our representation for our residents is, well, do you pay a whole lot more for a marginal extra convenience unfortunately, most of the residents that I've spoken to have said that that Honey Harbor Road location is not the extra convenience because of times and other things. And the South Bay Road, if it's within a reasonable run, then why not continue that? I have one other quick question, and that is we talked about the commercial waste pickup, and I think you indicated that the Honey Harbor downtown commercial roadside pickup is for commercial customers. And is that a different topic going forward, or is that still all part of this topic?
Through your worship, so I think what you're referring to is the downtown business collection areas that are part of the transition to producer responsibility. So I think it's important to note that that service was created because recycling for commercial businesses was going to cease November 19th, 2024. We heard from District Council concerns about downtown congested areas and the ability for those businesses to set out recycling or to arrange for their own private bins to manage recycling from a private contractor. And so staff developed a program that had specific routes in the downtown business collection areas. And so Honey Harbor is one of those routes. Certainly if it's the desire of Georgian Bay Council to cease that service, that is certainly something that we could take back as staff, and as we do our assessment for the downtown business collection areas and assess that service on its efficacy, we could certainly make a recommendation based on that feedback from the township.
Is that waste collection or recycling or both?
The downtown business collection areas are specific to recycling.
Recycling only?
Yep. Okay.
So just to, again, final comment on that. The businesses in the area are a little frustrated by the fact that the businesses that are not on that path, maybe they have more land, they're paying a whole lot more taxes, and the people that are not paying the higher taxes are getting the service. And it's just feedback. I mean, I get it, but it's feedback. Like, I'm paying more taxes, but the guy who's paying less taxes gets the service and I don't. And that's because I have more land where I could put a bin. Anyways, it doesn't seem to make sense. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And once again, thank you, James, for coming today. I do have a few comments and questions. I mean, the reality is somewhere around 35–40% of our households will have service removed, replaced by something, maybe or maybe not. That's pretty serious. I do recognize a number of different solutions that have been mentioned today, including adding in private roads and so forth. Councilor Hazelton sort of stole my thunder on the dockside pickup, but nevertheless, it was something that I made note of, that if we're going to have gold-plated service elsewhere, we might as well have it out on coastal Georgian Bay. That means a barge, or not a barge, but a steel boat go out and go dockside to dockside and pick up the garbage. So that might be a solution. Very expensive, but a solution. And if the township of Georgian Bay eventually pays for this, even if the district decides that they want to make the decision or not, I think really it should be up to the township of Georgian Bay since we pay the bill. I just wanted to say that, so I think it's important to understand. I think a couple of other things. So aside from I'm semi-serious about the gold-plated customer service that I'm talking about out dockside service. But in addition to that, I think our mayor made a notation of where other yacht havens are able to provide service, and I don't see any reason why our marinas in Honey Harbor can't be treated exactly the same way as the yacht havens, because what many don't realize, but I've done it, I've come out of yacht havens in Midland and Penetang to my cottage, and there are others that do that. So it's not outside the scope of those yacht havens to service the cottage community. So the technical reason for not allowing that is not being applied. And I say that would be in places like Parry Sound, Midland, Penetang, Gananoque. I could go on ad nauseum in Ontario. A few other things that have been said that I would like to comment about is that, you know, in some cases we've had a volume drop off, or will have a volume drop off at our marinas if we have a service there. But one of our marinas had, you know, it's a relatively medium-sized marina, had 2 or 3 times the amount of garbage as others. And that was because they were acting as sort of a community site, a business site, a you name it site. So it distorted the picture in terms of what was being collected there. So I think it's important to remember that. Few other, these are very random, I'm sorry, but they're related to the conversations we've had here. I think it's important to point out that while the district and our township decided to select option 3 for 2025, I don't believe we voted anywhere for 2026. I believe, it's my understanding that we voted in favor of a service for 2025. Is that not correct?
Through your worship. So the scenario was to identify the future of waste service for the Township of Georgian Bay. Now, just like any other service, that could be adjusted based on direction from District Council. So District Council could choose to say, I would like to add this, or I would like to delete that. So is it set in stone in perpetuity? Absolutely not. But until we have different direction from District Council, that's the scenario that we're in now.
Okay, but I just wanted to be clear that I was pretty sure we voted for 2025, and we're still working on what the solution is for the future, and that's why we're meeting today.
Through your worship. So the answer is that the scenario 3 states what the service level for the Township of Georgian Bay is going forward. Again, like anything else that's with respect to direction from District Council, if staff are given separate direction or different direction, then we would certainly receive that and act on that.
So if we decide we don't need trucks at our marinas, we don't need them, they're not going to work, we can just say thanks, but no thanks. We're the customer after all, I would hope. Is that not correct?
Yep, through you, your worship. I think it's important to understand that those decisions are made by District Council. And so the Township of Georgian Bay has a number of district councillors that if they were to propose something at District Council and it was carried, then obviously staff would take that direction.
So I would ask that you get back to us about what also is written in the Municipal Act about who drives the bus, because as I understand it, if you read the wording carefully, it actually says that lower tier municipalities, except for about I think 5 of the 440, 5 of them can't, but in other words, they have to do whatever the district tells them. Everybody else, at the collection side only, all of the lower tier municipalities can be responsible if they so choose for the collection. So I'd ask you to look into that, because that's certainly what I've read in the Municipal Act. But have you?
So through you, your worship, I'm not an expert in the Municipal Act and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't comment on what the Municipal Act says. I do know that waste service was uploaded to the district in the 90s, and so that's the bylaw that we're working under right now. If that bylaw was to be amended to change the way the nature of the waste system operates, then staff would take that direction.
So thank you. I would just ask that you maybe look into what I'm postulating here, if you don't mind. Finally, we're talking about a solution, for example, for Go Home Lake, where there'd be 15 hours a week of service. And if we roll that out over 15 or 20 marinas, could be a lot of money. So can you tell me what 15 hours a week translates into in terms of cost for 1 week? And we can then multiply by 50 or 30 weeks and then by whatever in terms of number of marinas. So what is the cost of that? Can you detail that for me?
Through your worship, I'll have to get back to you on the actual costs, but it would be, we did consider lakeside collection for, say, the marinas in Honey Harbor. Given the fact that the Honey Harbor depot location is within 10 minutes, the idea of lakeside at those locations was not considered further. And so we would be, and I think where you're going with that is, what's the most cost-effective solution? Certainly having a collection vehicle sitting at a number of marinas for short periods of time is certainly less efficient than operating the depot at Honey Harbor.
Fair enough. And I actually go through Honey Harbor myself, as do a number of other people at my marina, but it's not in the town of Honey Harbor. It's in a north bay of Honey Harbor, so it's quite some distance. I total the amount of time it would take me to get to a transfer station, not in Honey Harbor, that would take even longer. But to go to the transfer station on Highway 400 is about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes one way. And there are a number of people in the same boat, so to speak. So I think it's important to understand that I'm not the only one that's dealing with that. There's several marinas outside of the town of Honey Harbor that they're going to be not only spending a lot of time in a boat, coming from even further away than I am, but then they load up their car. All in, they could be an hour and a half. So I think that's not 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Predko.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, just a few more questions for Commissioner Steele, and hopefully generic or general enough for lakeside collection that it's applicable to all areas of the township that are being considered for this. The one thing that we have talked about is that to be eligible to drop your garbage off at lakeside collection, you need to be on the list. And so what has the experience in other locations been for campers and people who are visiting the lake and have waste? Are they just simply not eligible to drop off at the lakeside collection event?
Through your worship, so the intention of district provided services to supply waste collection services to residents and commercial businesses. And so the idea of having receptacles for convenience in those locations, public space receptacles, is not a function that the district provides. Now, I would say that if someone would say, for example, is renting an Airbnb and provided the property that they stayed at, that would be considered as an eligible source. Now, if it's for campers, then unfortunately they'll have to find another location to put their material, or the township, which is under their jurisdiction, could put public space receptacles in to manage that additional waste should they choose to.
Okay, I mean, that is one of the common concerns raised by people that campers won't have a place that is readily accessible and will potentially be leaving their waste at the side of the road. Then you had also mentioned earlier that there's also the 2-bag limit per drop off per household at these events. And is the clear bag policy going to also take effect at this, or is that not part of this?
Through your worship, so any material that's collected as garbage will have to comply with the clear bag policy.
So your website will need to change on that front, because right now it says it only applies to curbside collection.
Yep. So we'll update that as the programs roll out.
Okay. And then one other common question is in the past in conversations, and I think whether it was in surveys or other meeting, we have heard, or I have inferred, that there is the notion of the potential for common collection points on private roads. And is that something that the district is rolling out, and then it could be a consideration for some of these areas that there's a bin currently, but especially where there are roadside people close to a bin, and that would divert them from the lakeside event.
So through your worship, so the intention is to replace the service with one of the following in this following order. So if curbside is available, then certainly curbside or roadside is the first option. Secondly would be roadside or curbside through a common collection point. So that's as you described. If it's a private road that perhaps doesn't have the ability to have the curbside vehicle go through, then there's an option there. Now there are limitations on the number of bins that would be appropriate for that, just given the space constraints required for curbside, common collection points, and then transitioning to lakeside, and then ultimately a drop-off location.
Okay. And as you're doing this evaluation on the private roads throughout the township, you would be going through that checklist and hierarchy to determine the most appropriate service for that location.
Your worship, that's correct. And I pulled up our communication plan. So the intent is to complete the investigations over the next few months. And then in sometime earlier this year to send out frequently asked questions to folks that are affected. And then we'll be installing signage at the bin sites in the spring. And then folks will be getting direct mailed letters to say, here's what your proposed alternative services, to let them know how they will take advantage of the service, whether it's curbside or lakeside. And then if it's drop-off depot, then we'll be relying on the signage at the site to let them know where their closest drop-off location was.
And you had shown us the slides from the district's council meeting on February 18th. Will that be made available to us so that we can share information from that with our residents, or should we wait till after the district council meeting?
Thank you, and through your worship. So the intention is that those slides would be posted with the agenda for district council next week. And so it should be up by the end of the day today or sometime tomorrow, likely, when the agenda gets posted. So it'll be publicly available for anyone. Okay.
And then finally, just for our CAO, Greg, can you confirm, and maybe this isn't the right moment to confirm, but we've budgeted for large item pickup that would be organized through the township and not through the district for 2025. Can you just confirm, I believe we passed the money in the budget, and can you just confirm that we're moving ahead with that?
Through you, Mayor Coutier, I believe large item barging, large item pickup barging. Is that what you're referring to, Councillor Predko?
Well, barging and large item dockside pickup are different things, and I just want to make sure that we're all clear on what it is that we've approved for this year.
So I saw Ms. Radigan
Nodding.
the camera on, so she's the font of all things financial, and so I'll let her chime in.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Coutier, to Councillor Predko. We did budget for 2 large item pickups. We didn't specify whether there would be for barging or on land, so I believe you could do either or. Okay. No.
And my comment is, I think, related to the fact that I think there's a lot of snow load damage to people's sheds and temporary garages, those soft-sided garages and things out on the island and water access properties that people will, I'm sure, be eager to get the remnants of removed this year. Okay, anyway, that's all right now. Thank you.
Councillor Jarvis.
Yeah, just looking at the law of unintended consequences as part of all this work that's being done by district with regards to lakeside pickup. What we're doing, or what's being proposed, I know is probably one of the only alternative we can look at right now. And I appreciate the work that's being done, but what you're doing is increasing the carbon footprint for the whole area, particularly for our municipality, because people will be making more trips by boat. And we know that vessels are a significant contributor to our carbon footprint. And so in the end, I guess we get garbage taken care of one way or the other, but in the end, that in turn results in a significant increase in the carbon, the volatile air content as a result of all those boat trips. I think that's rather unfortunate. Strictly an observation. I don't need an answer. I don't think there's a question in that at all. But I do question from the outset, and we're going back a couple of years now, when the MOECP came down with their mandate to remove these bins. I think in hindsight, perhaps the feet on the ground at that time should have been working with MOECP to come up with a better way of handling the bin sites that was more reflective of what we're currently doing, which is bin site collection, and setting that up in a better way, as opposed to saying, okay, we'll go along and remove all the bins. I don't think the mandate wasn't open-ended in a way, and it's unfortunate we've gotten to this point. Having said all that, and again, really merely observations, Mr. Steele, we're stuck with a situation that's going to be rather difficult to work with. And I know that my constituents and any other of us, of the councilors here, are going to be hearing an earful from all our constituents on this. But I presume it's we'll have to make do with what we've got. But I would have preferred that we worked with the ECP earlier on in the program to see if we could have kept things as they were with proper ECAs involved. But I guess we'll have to see what our consultants come back to us with, and we'll go from there. Anyway, strictly observations. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Jarvis, still actively trying to work with MECP. Refuse to give up that approach for some of the reasons that you've already stated. But I want to put a different twist on this for a moment, Commissioner Steele. We're going to clear bags, and I presume that's going to include the various lakeside pickups and all that sort of thing. So can I assume from that district will not be collecting any recyclables at these lakeside pickups because of the province thinks that the producers can do a better job, though they've yet to demonstrate that?
Through your worship, I think what folks will see, at least until January 2026, which is when the producers fully take over the system, the lakeside events will have recycling and garbage. What the future holds depends on what we land on with circular materials starting in January. So there's still something remain to be, or what the results remain to be seen.
Okay, and organics?
At this time, we don't have capacity in the trucks. They're only dual stream trucks, so they can be recycling or garbage. But perhaps if we end up in a situation where circular materials decide to do something, provide an alternative service for recycling, then in our minds, we're considering, do you put the other side of the truck as organics so that we could collect organics at the same time as garbage?
Yes, in other words, it continues to evolve, if I can put it that way, because I think that's one thing that I think a lot of folks haven't really considered carefully is the whole recycling side of things is going through a transition, and having dealt with recycling pickup problems in another place where I live, because it's no longer being provided by the municipality, is just adds to the challenges of the average resident. So I can see us having even more of those challenges, because guess what? The unique challenges we have in solid waste collection also are applicable to recycling collection. So I think that's very important. I see Councillor Hazelton's hand up again, but I'll just double check with Councillor Bochuk that you're not interested in joining the second round before I go to Councillor Hazelton.
No, I'm fine. You can go to Council Hazelton.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelton.
Commissioner Steele, I heard you say something that was maybe very interesting. You have heard from other councillors who have shared that we have a significant camper presence in our township and a significant generation of waste for the campers. I heard you say that your focus is to deliver services for the residents of the township and not for the campers, correct?
Through your worship, that's what our obligation is under the Municipal Act, is to provide service to residential properties only. Public space management of waste in public spaces is the area municipality's responsibility.
Okay, so so that then begs the question of what might that look like? So I think I heard you say for campers, Georgian Bay Township could provide receptacles for waste or waste and recycling for campers. Can you give us an idea of what that might look like?
Through your worship, I mean, I haven't been involved with developing a system like that, but I would imagine it would be similar to the waste receptacles that are in parks.
So garbage cans as opposed to bins.
Yes.
Okay, so one of the things that we've heard from our friends on Go Home Lake is that in addition to having 450 properties in the lake, roughly, they feel that they probably have in the summer days in the neighborhood of 250 campers, whether it's 250 or 200 or 150. That's probably not a garbage pail of waste or recycling. That's probably a full-size bin or two of recycling. And if you look at the volume of waste coming out of Go Home Lake, it would certainly support that assumption. I'm wondering what opportunities does the township have to have bins for waste from campers so that it doesn't end up in the gullies and sides of the roads, so on like that?
Through your worship, I guess I'll go back to my previous answer is I don't have experience developing public space receptacles and what the regulations would be associated with that. And so perhaps that's something that the township would have to consider on their own.
So if the township had bins, can I understand from your comment that the district would have no role in disposing, picking up those, contracting or anything like that? It would be township, you're on your own for this?
Through your worship, so that's how it works with other municipalities. Parklands, parks are collected, municipal buildings are collected through area municipal contracts with vendors, with their own vendors.
So how is that monitored?
Sorry, Makuti, may I? We do this already, Councillor Hazelton. We have public works staff that do the rounds, pick up bins at Honey Harbour, Port Seven, at the facilities. This is a township. I think Commissioner Steele has said now 2 or 3 times it's a township responsibility.
I understand.
So it's no point continuing to ask Commissioner Steele the same questions because it's not his domain.
I understand that, but we as a township haven't embraced the challenge that Go Home Lake has, or that for that matter, the waste that is generated at McRae Lake. And historically, it's been done through the bin services that the district has managed. And so what I'm trying to highlight here is we have a potentially significant problem that we as a council and township haven't embraced because of the volume. And so I just wanted to make sure we get that on the table, and sometimes repeating it is useful. But I did want to go back to an earlier comment that you had made. You indicated that for the lakeside collection, the operators have a list and people have to identify themselves to ensure that they're candidates. What proof is required, or is it verbal?
Through your worship, the it's usually verbal confirmation, but they could be asked, and if you look at our website, it says that folks could be asked to provide some sort of confirmation of their address. So they could have a tax bill, they could have their driver's license, that they have their name on the list as a property owner. There's a number of ways, but generally speaking, they're asked to provide the property that they are accessing, and then the list is compared to the list.
Sounds to me like there's an opportunity for neighbors helping neighbors. Do you see that as being a risk or an experience?
Through you, your worship, ultimately every system could have flaws and people could certainly take advantage of gaps in the system. The intent is that that property gets 1 week of service at each of the, or at the event. So if someone was to say, hey, you're going to use my address, perhaps there's a risk that they could use it nefariously. I think generally speaking, people want to do the right thing and wouldn't perpetrate fraud in that situation, but we're certainly not, our focus is certainly to provide the service, and if it becomes challenging, then to start escalating to the level of information provided. So I guess what I would say through your worship is that if we see that there's abuse of the system, then we're likely to require more identification at the locations.
So thank you for that. It actually introduces another potentially key point. At these lakeside collection points or any of the depots, I think I've heard comments that you're going to have a 2-bag limit.
Through you, your worship, that's correct.
So one of the things that we have tried to share with the district over the time is, and again, we argued earlier today, how many properties do we have? Well, maybe we have 5,500, maybe 6,000 properties, but we got 20,000 people here in the summertime. The waste generated by 20,000 people is a whole lot more than on average 2.2 or 1.8 people per property. So I guess my point would be waste is going to be generated based on the population, not on the property count. And if you have a firm 2-bag limit with no ability at that point in time to pay extra perhaps for getting rid of another garbage bag, then that becomes actually a real logistical problem. Can you help us understand how we get around those obstacles? Because again, a 2-bag limit may be appropriate in a city, but in a seasonal community where we have like 4 times the population, 5 times or more the population in the summer, and it's not, you're being wasteful, more people generate more garbage. How do we deal with that?
Through your worship. So I guess what I would start with is if you put the right material in the right places, so if you're recycling appropriately, if you're putting your material in the organics collection or managing it yourself or reducing overall material you're bringing to the location, certainly that's the optimum. What we found is that folks who are following that unlimited recycling, unlimited organics where we have it available, there's actually very little garbage that's generated. And so what we would ask people to do is to focus on getting the right materials in the right places. It's totally inappropriate for recycling to end up in the landfill and using up space for the entire district in perpetuity. So if that one bottle lands in the landfill, that space is taken up by garbage that's not appropriate, that doesn't have any other place to go. And so I think that's the first component. There still is an opportunity for folks to have bag tags and bring their tag bags if they're beyond the 2-bag limit. That's available to them at the lakeside events, that's available to them at depots and the transfer stations.
So you're implementing not only these other new services, but the bag tag concept is alive and well, and bag tags could be purchased through the township or someplace else?
Yep, bag tags are absolutely a possibility across the district, as they have been for many years. For
So-
anyone who wanted to bring more material than their allowed limit.
So is that in place today? Like if somebody recognized that they were going to have a weekend of 4 bags
Mhm.
and they needed to dispose of 4 bags, where would they buy a bag tag and how would they present themselves to the disposal location and be confident that they could get rid of those other bags?
Yep, so they can buy bag tags off the district. Some of the area municipalities sell the bag tags as well. I believe, well, I know Huntsville sells it online for bag tags. And for that matter, we even sell them in groups. If you want to buy a number of bag tags at a single instance, then you can get a discounted price for them. So those are entirely available today, totally available for curbside collection, but also at the depots as well.
Thank you. That's a very important data point. Thanks.
Councilor Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor. And this is actually a question for our CAO. Could you clarify to me again the waste services that you're referring to at locations that our staff pick up and where exactly this is happening?
At various public park spaces, as well as at the Baxter Ward, at the CSB building, at the arena. These are locations that we pick up and we dispose here through a private contractor.
So is that a garbage truck or is that a pickup truck that goes around and then subsequently?
Yeah, and then it disposes at a bin here.
So we're already in the business. Could be expanded. Interesting. Do we have ECAs for these sites?
No, these are no different than, let's say, at a gas station. You know, when you gas up and you put your coffee cup in that bin, there's a need for an ECA for something like that.
But it's still waste.
Yeah, but you don't need an ECA for that in that instance.
So if we had a lot of those, then we'd be okay. That's
Sure, yeah. Put one at the end of each driveway.
At the end of my dock. That's interesting. So we're in the business. That's news to me. Thank you.
I'm seeing messages that we're about to lose a couple of councilors in this meeting. One's already disappeared. Okay. I think it's maybe a good time for us to say thank you very much, Mr. Steele, Commissioner Steele, for your time today. We've had a couple of rounds and lots of good conversation, and we really appreciate you dropping by. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and as many members of committee and council know, that my phone is always on and happy to take any additional questions.
You've been known to answer emails at all hours. Thank you again. Council, I think it's a good time to wrap this up, as some people have to go, and we've been at it for 2 hours. So I'm going to have moved by Councillor Bochek, seconded by Councillor Predko. Is he still there? Yes, he is. Good. Be it resolved, the Committee of the Whole is now adjourned at 3:08 p.m. to reconvene March 4th, 2025, or at the call of the chair. All those in favor? All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We are now adjourned. And thank you. You didn't even get a closing speech from me.